Hey team, welcome to our second installation of Self Defensy Shit. Today we're going to talk about something that comes up all the time in the self-defense community, which is to high cover or not to high cover as it pertains to the trap and roll. So we're going to talk about two primary schools of thought. Big stretch. All right. And we've got, again, two schools of thought here. So the first is that if somebody is raining down punches from above, it makes the most sense to high cover, right? To protect the head as best as you can. The other school of thought is that we need to have frames in at the hip to ensure that they don't ride up and make this a whole lot worse. So let's talk about each one, right? So this idea that we high cover, right? Excellent as it pertains to defending here. The trick is that the more he rides up, the less ability I have to shrimp or buck out. He's also pretty easily able to shuck the hands off, and now this is much worse. If the person has any kind of knowledge of grappling, they also have a better understanding of the submission potential as they continue to ride up. So pros, we have a arguably slightly better defense as it pertains to preventing blunt force trauma to the head. And the con is that if the person has not just any grappling knowledge, but truly, they watched MMA for like 5 seconds, they know that riding up creates an advantage for them. On the offense, it makes it much more difficult for their opponent to get out, and the opportunity to shuck those hands off is huge in terms of the potential to cause damage. So, as it pertains to creating frames, right? If you look at traditional jiu-jitsu, we often have this L frame where the elbow is tucked on the inside, and we have this lap belt. Now, this is where sport jiu-jitsu and grappling for self-defense may diverge. Because here, what I would do in order to kind of mitigate that issue is to put my elbows on the inside. And what that does is if I crunch really well, I do have a little protection here. Obviously, it's not great, but it's something. And then, because I'm keeping him down at my hips, this buck, this ability to get his hands off of me using the lower body rather than the upper body is improved significantly because I keep him down. So for example, hit me, Brian, right? The more I buck, the better off I am at keeping his hands off of my face, which also leads me right into this trap and roll, okay? So the pros here, I keep him at my hips, makes it easier for me to get out completely and also in the long term. I still do have a defense for my head by using my lower body rather than my upper body, which is counterintuitive, but it does help ensure that I have an escape option. So obviously, there's a lot of cons here as it pertains to, it feels very scary not to have that full high cover, but we eliminate the potential of getting into what is now a much more desperate situation. So, to high cover or not to high cover, I think it's difficult to say that it needs to be all one approach or all the other approach, but understanding fully the pros and cons of each is essential to teaching this in a realistic and safe way that honors the nuances, because a lot of times in self-defense we say, oh, well, we're dealing with an untrained person. That's increasingly not true. People are training, people are watching the UFC, and quite frankly, if there's somebody more dangerous than a trained person, it's somebody who watches MMA on a regular basis and thinks they know what they're doing. So having some sense of knowledge of these nuances on either side is important to teach this in a way that's responsible. So here, hip, right? Tap here. Here. Do that again. So here and down, right? Come up again. Come up again. Right. Right. Right.